So just a quick check-in on where the Russian military build-out is going and what things are looking like right now. Vladimir Putin has signed a decree that sets out the spring conscription effort. Now, this is something that takes place every year. It happened before the war, and it happened last year. But the Russians will be calling up 147,000 citizens for statutory military service. They did this in last fall in September when they called up 120,000 people. The Ministry of Defense says that the conscripts won't be fighting in Ukraine. However, they said that last September, and they found that many of the 120,000 that were called up ended up in Ukraine. So the argument is these would be untrained citizens, so they wouldn't go to the front line. However, we've seen many articles talking about the 2-week training soldiers that ended up on the front line that were getting killed or defecting or flat out revolting against the Russian command structure. So we'll see how this goes. Again, it's 147,000 troops that are going to be called up. What'll likely happen is if they aren't a part of the war effort almost immediately, they will eventually be funneled to the war effort, especially if sometime in the next month or two we see a big push from Ukraine with regard to a spring offensive. On the domestic front, Russian companies are being told that they need to be building their own air defense systems. The head of Russia's State Duma Defense Committee advised companies to build their own air defense systems as military funds are being concentrated elsewhere. We all know where elsewhere is, clearly Ukraine. Now, this comes up as reports of drones over Russian soil and explosions close to military bases used by Moscow's forces to close the Ukrainian border. What they're trying to do is they're trying to get big companies to buy air defenses to supplement the Russian air defense system in these areas around these bases, because Russia is running out of money and capability to fund new air defense systems. Russian companies are having to install these systems on their own buildings and build their own bomb shelters throughout Russia, even though Russia is saying everything is fine. Additionally, the head of the Russian Ministry of Energy has stated that Lukoil, which is Russia's second largest oil producer, has created its own corporate private security organization. And I talked about this a couple months ago, where these large companies are now starting to secure themselves, which is interesting because it starts out as securing yourself and then it magically turns into, this is my army forcing a revolution. So the reason they're saying that Lukoil is saying they want to do this is they want to protect their facilities around the country due to the main end threats being some sort of terroristic activity against them. So again, private militaries are being built up in Russia. The Russian government is telling these companies, build your own air defenses. This is very weird for what would be considered a major power in the world. The U.S. government would never tell Apple, build your own air defense systems. We can't do it. That's just not how it works. But this is what's happening in Russia. And then also, Putin issued a decree that removes the upper age limit for Russian National Guard members serving in parts of Ukraine under the control of Russian forces. Now, this National Guard in Ukraine was established in 2016, and it reports directly to Putin. It doesn't fall into the normal chain of command. The National Guard soldiers have been heavily used in Ukraine throughout the full-scale invasion launched last February, and many have been fired or jailed or even executed for refusing to fight. This decree notes that Russian citizens serving in the annexed territories will be instead assessed a military medical examination. But the weird thing about this military medical examination is it's going to be conducted in absentia. So they're going to examine the military fitness and medical fitness of these National Guard soldiers while they're not even there. So it's just basically saying, yeah, he's totally fit, send him. And that's what is happening in these Russian-controlled territories in Ukraine. Putin described the National Guard's key tasks as counterterrorism, extremism, and organized crime. So that's what they're trying to counter. And they also guard strategic facilities, maintain law, and also respond to any kind of mass events and monitoring arms trades within Ukraine. But the reality is they have ended up on the front line previously. And it's kind of funny, when you remove the upper age limit, it means that some of these really old men that fought in like World War II or were brought up on the T-54 and T-55 tanks, maybe they can leverage that knowledge, because I can tell you that Russia has brought out almost all of its T-54 and T-55 tanks from long-term storage in order to replace the 2,000 tanks that were lost during the first year of the fighting in Ukraine. However, these tanks are incredibly obsolete and largely considered expendable even by the Russian government, with outdated optics that make them actually a liability in night battles. So you don't want to be around these tanks at night, because the only way they can see at night is using white light, which is like a normal headlight or flashlight, or using infrared spotlights. So basically what they have to do is, in order for them to see in this old ancient version of night vision, is they have to look through the optic, and then they have a large infrared floodlight that shines out. Now we can't see it with the naked eye, but it's picked up by any sensor that can see infrared. Nearly every tank on the Ukrainian side and almost fighting vehicles use passive night vision. The Bradley, the Abrams, the Leopard, the Challenger, any of the NATO versions of equipment that we have sent to Ukraine use passive infrared. And what's going to happen when those outdated optics and infrared spotlights light up is it's going to look like a beacon at night to any of the NATO equipment. They will see that better than a normal headlight. It's incredible. If you've ever used an infrared spotlight while wearing night vision, it lights up the whole world. It's ridiculous. And the Kremlin has no plans to upgrade the night vision systems or the sighting systems to the modern tanks, because they just can't. They don't have. If they had modern equipment to upgrade, they would be putting it in their more modern tanks, their T-72s and above. But because they don't have it, they are unable to upgrade them. So instead, these tanks are going to roll into battle with the same guns, the same fire control systems, the same optics as they used largely 70 years ago. These spotlights are going to give away their position to anyone using night vision, whether it's a soldier on the ground using a javelin, or a Bradley using a tow missile, or a Abrams tank with its main gun. It's just going to be ugly for these tanks. And I can't fathom that they would actually use these tanks other than to try to instill some sort of confidence within the local population. So the reason that they're doing this is beyond me, because it lacks basically all of the components necessary in a 2023 armored battle. And the reason they have to do this is because they probably lack the ability to build new tanks, and they just aren't really in a position where they have any armor. So some armor is better than none, especially they're deadly against infantry during the day. And if that infantry isn't carrying any kind of anti-tank weapon, but the armor on these is very, very obsolete, and it's kind of seen as a resource saver for the Kremlin while still fielding some sort of armor. But it's going to be, these tanks are going to get massacred, and they've faced off in battle before. The Challenger fought T-55s before, and it was an absolute destruction of the T-55s. It was so lopsided that the T-55 was shuttered forever after that. And since then, they seem to have been brought back. So we'll see.